In this video, we're going to be talking about how to send emails from Supabase with the HTTP extension and the Supabase Mailer project from Github. Okay, so on the Supabase YouTube channel, they've got a video that explains the HTTP extension. Now, essentially, it's the guy that sits there and spends a bit of time talking to a Kanye West API, and it honestly, I got nothing out of it of any use particularly. I don't think it gave us too much usable information, so I couldn't find too much information out there on this. So you're kind of on your own a little bit, which is why I'm doing this. So what we're going to look at using it for sending emails. We're going to use it for sending SMS messages, which we use anyway, as you've seen both of those already in previous videos if you've been watching them. And then also we're going to look at retrieving some data from an API. Now, originally I was going to do each of those in a single video, but it was starting to look a bit like a Ridley Scott director's cut epic. So each is going to get its own video, do one on emails, one on the SMS, and one on the data API. And this one we're going to be looking at sending emails. So let's go and take a look. Now, first thing you will need to do is have the extension enabled in your Supabase instance. So you go database extensions, and HTTP needs to be toggled green, so it's switched on. Now, if it's not in your enabled extensions list, you can scroll down, look for it, or alternatively you can search for it in the search bar at the top. So that's the first thing. You need to make sure it is enabled for it to work. So this one is really not my doing at all. Well, it's not really not my doing. It isn't my doing at all. I take no credit for it whatsoever. There is a Github project called Supabase Mailer, and I use this on our project management app. Again, I've mentioned it several times, and every time a project gets updated, the project team get an email that says this project has had an update, just so you can go and take a look, see what's been updated. We are using Mailjet for our email provider, and as you can see, there's a few of these already all there to set up. So let's go to the Mailjet one. Send email Mailjet. This is the documentation for that. Well, this is the function for it that you need to put into your Supabase instance, and this is the documentation for Mailjet. As you can see, there is some documentation for Mailer Send, Mailgun, Mailjet, Send Grid, and Send in blue. I just chose Mailjet. There's no particular reason why. So you need to have a look through this, but we'll go and have a look at in how I'm using it rather than sort of me reading to you what you can go and easily go and look up and read yourself. So it's pretty straightforward. Once you've got it set up, you don't have to do anything. It just functions. Getting it set up, it's pretty straightforward. It's mostly just a copy and paste job. So it's you're gonna have no problem setting this up. The only thing is making sure you're getting your keys and everything correct and getting them in the right schemas and stuff. So let's go and take up the mail thing first, and then we'll go from there. Right, this is the function literally copied and pasted in to my Supabase instance from GitHub. What we're doing, we are composing a message in JSON, which we can send as an HTTP request to the Mailjet server. The message itself, we are constructing elsewhere and bringing it into this function, which I'll show you afterwards. Now, when you get all the way down to the bottom, do not allow this function to be called in public users or called from the client. So what we're doing, we're not calling this function from our Flutterflow apps. We are calling a different function which creates the JSON, which is the message we're sending, this is what we're importing, and then that's what then gets sent. So we're calling this particular function from inside another Supabase function. Now, to set this up, you will need your API keys and your secret. So again, all of these things are the same. So what I'll do, I will log into Mailjet, show you where I get those from. They're all going to be the same, but essentially what you do, you create a private schema in your Supabase instance that stores your Mailjet API key and your secret. So therefore, we're selecting into our Mailjet API variable, which we've declared there, from private keys, the mail API key, and we're also selecting the Mailjet secret key from private keys, where the key is Mailjet secret key. So in your Supabase instance, to set up the private schema, again, the Supabase Mailer project gives you everything you need. So essentially, you just copy and paste that to create the schema, and then the function to insert into private keys is also in the documentation. This is what the function that creates the private schema and the keys table looks like in your SQL editor. So you just copy and paste it in, click run, and then if you go to your table editor, and you should then have a schema called private, and then you should have a keys table, which obviously I'm not going to open because it's got API keys in it. So done it correctly, that's what it will look like. And also, obviously, you don't have to use the insert private keys function necessarily. You can just copy and paste them or type them into the table manually. It's entirely up to you. So really, the first thing you're going to have to do is go and just read this documentation because it's all here. So we're selecting those from our private schema, and then this is really where we're getting into the HTTP request there. So basically, you have to compose the HTTP request from your Supabase instance in PGHTTP in a certain way. So I'll go to that GitHub project now, and I'll show you how they ask you to construct that. So this is the GitHub page for the HTTP extension. Now, all these URLs I'll stick in the comments below so you can go and play with them to your heart's content. So this is the setup we are using. So it's the public HTTP request. So this is the HTTP method, which will be post, get, etc. You've got the URI, which is the URL of the API that you're connecting to. You've got your headers, which we'll come on to in a minute, and that's probably where you're going to be sticking your API keys, amongst other things, depending on what API you're connecting to. The content type and the content itself. So when you create your HTTP request, that's what you need to build into it. So if we go back to our Supabase Mailer project we're using here, we've got our HTTP method, which is post. We've got our endpoint, basically, which is the URI, which is the Mailjet endpoint. Our headers, we've got our encoded Mailjet API keys and our secret key, which is that line. Then we've got the type, which is the application JSON, and then we're building using the JSON build object command to build our content, which is basically the message. So that's how we do it. And then when we call that function, that goes off to Mailjet and it sends the message to your recipients. So the message itself and all the variables within it, we are sending into this function from the other function. Like I said earlier, we're actually not calling this function from our Flutterflow application. We're calling another one, which I'll go on to now and just show you how we're building up the actual message that is coming into here with these variables. Right, so in Flutterflow, we are calling send email message, and we're passing in the project variable. Now, I've deleted the email address. So basically, we're a small team. So these are hard coded in here. So I'm not having to. Well, there's no reason not to. There's only a few people. So that's why I've deleted the email address. So, but these in here, you really, if you're doing this for anything more than a handful of people, you need to be passing the recipients, the sender, etc. into the function from your Flutterflow app via parameters, which is again we've been over this many times, and if you're interested in the Flutterflow stuff, if you hang around to the end, I'm going to go over some of that anyway, rather than just the Supabase side. So hang around to the end, we'll look at that anyway. But again, passing parameters into a Supabase function from Flutterflow. If you watch most of the videos on this channel, it's all there. We've done it many times. So, but in this particular instance, I've got them hard coded because there's only a few. So we've got the sender, the recipients, the subject, and the HTML body, and then those are the parameters that we're passing into the Mailjet function. So we've got the sender, the recipients, the subject, and the body. So basically we call this function from Supabase, we build the message here with our senders, the subject, and the HTML body, and obviously you can put anything you like in there, any subject, any body, whatever, you know, obviously whatever you want is an email. And then we are passing that into our Mailjet function. So the message itself is this section, and that is what is built from the previous function. And the type, as I said, is application JSON. These are the headers with your API codes in. You've got the API endpoint, and we're using post. So if we go back to here, we are constructing it. We've got the method, which is post. We've got the URI, which is the API endpoint for Mailjet. You've got the headers, which is what contains our API key. You've got the content type, and you've got the content. That's how it's constructed. And then when you call that function, it sends an email to those people on that list and just tells them there's been a message or an update, whatever. That's really it. Now, like I say, all of this, I didn't write any of this. This came out of the Github project. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into the Mailjet API now and show you how that's constructed. Because obviously the HTTP message needs to be constructed how the Postgres HTTP extension wants you to construct it, i.e. the request. But obviously the receiving endpoint, the API you're connecting to, also has got its own way of having a message constructed or a request constructed. So you have to check in that. So you make sure that your HTTP request in Supabase is compatible with the endpoint that you're requesting to in terms of how you've set up the request. So I'll go onto the Mailjet side now, and then I'll show you how they want it, how we've done it, and then hopefully that will tie all this up. So whichever email provider you use, I suspect most people pick one from the list that's in the GitHub project, because the project's all been set up to accommodate the way they want their request set up. You will get your API keys, which I'm fairly certain most people would have seen them before, but in your email provider you'll have an API key and a secret key probably, and these what you put in your keys table. So the API key and the secret key are what are contained in your keys table, and they are the values that are being pulled from the keys table into here to construct your message and add them to the headers of your HTTP request, which is how you authenticate yourself with the endpoint. That's basically it. So if we head back over to Mailjet, let's look at the documentation. Right, so the API documentation, again, they're all going to be different, slightly different, but ultimately the documentation will be there within whichever email provider you use. There is a free tier on Mailjet. I have no affiliation with them, it's just the one I picked. There's a free tier you can use, so this is probably why I went for it, to be honest. So we're on version 3.1, and down here it tells you how to set up your API request. Now for the sending the email side of this, because I copy and pasted the Supabase Mailer Github project, the structure is already set up for me. So essentially I didn't need to worry about any of this, but it does tell you, you type his post, your API keys you need to send, which go in the headers. It gives you the HTML endpoint. It tells you the content type and essentially the message. Okay, so although it's good to understand this stuff, and if you're messing around with APIs, you need to understand this stuff, obviously. For the Mailer project specifically, you don't need to. It's all done for you. So if you just follow the instructions on the GitHub project, maybe use this video as a reference, and just copy and paste everything as it's meant to be done, you don't need to particularly worry about the way the message is constructed and the way the API request is constructed, because it's all done for you. It's already set up. Now, when we get on to the next video and we talk about SMS messages, that's different. It's not set up for us, so we've got to do it from scratch. Now, the other thing, while we're still in the Mailjet documentation, is senders and domains. So if you're sending an email from any of these services, you have to validate the send email address or the domain you're sending from. So you can do that within the dashboard. It'll be in there before it lets you do anything. You'll have to do it. So whatever email address you're sending from, you have to validate that email address. Or if you're sending from multiple addresses within the same domain, then you can do that domain, obviously, because you can use this. We use this as an internal project management tool. So you've seen it before. We've got a project management app, and it tracks as we go through. The users get a notification when something changes, and we use it for those notifications. But obviously you can use it for anything. Use it for sales letters, or anything you can think of sending an email for, as long as it's within the terms of service of the provider you're using, you can use it for. So maybe you do want different email addresses. So it's just something to bear in mind, that when you do start to send emails, you will need to verify your sender. Now, so what we're going to do now, we're going to go into Flutterflow, and then we're going to track this back through from when we make the request all the way back through to sending the email, just to reiterate what we've just done. Okay, so everybody's use case is going to be different for these, but I'm going to run through like the use case that we use and maybe give some ideas on how you might want to use it. So if you got this far, well done. This is the too long didn't read bit, so we're just going to quickly run back through everything we just talked about and reinforce it, so hopefully it makes sense. Basically what we're doing, when a project gets updated and the progress is updated on any given project, we are changing the date and updating it. So when that's done, we call a custom action in Flutterflow which sends an email. Now we are calling the send email function in Supabase via the RPC call, and we are sending the project number. So every project that we have has a project number, which is up here. So what happens is there's several people involved and of the management team, and what we do when something happens that we need to update it, then they change the date, triggers the custom action, and in Supabase we call the send email function, which sends the email to notify the rest of the team what's happened. So basically what that is, the custom action calls send email, which is this function which you've already seen obviously, and we are passing in the parameter of the project number, which we are taking out of Flutterflow. So that's the project number that we're passing in, and then in turn that calls the send email Mailjet function, which is the main function that sends the email, and it's building the JSON with the information in that we are sending to our recipients. We've got the sender, the recipients, the project, which is the parameter, and just a message to say it's been updated. And if you remember, we're hard coding our email addresses in our internal project management app into the function. But if you want to send them via a parameter, you've got a couple of ways you can do it. You can add some parameters within your Flutterflow function to send to your send email function in Supabase, and they could be the email addresses of the users that you're trying to send the emails to and from. Alternatively, you could send in some parameters that would be able to select the ones you want from your users table, and you could put a select statement in here to select the users, assign them to a variable, and then they would go into the senders and recipients. So you can pass them in as parameters here, or you can select them within here and add them into the function like we have done in the project. And obviously the sender must be a email address that has been approved stroke validated by your email sending provider whose API you're connecting to. So that calls the send email Mailjet function, which is then this one. And this is the one again that pulls the keys out of the private schema. It constructs the message as per the Mailjet requirements and the HTTP requirements of the Postgres extension. So we've got the type, the post type, the API endpoint, the headers, the type, and the message itself. And then what that does, that simply just sends the email to our recipients with a message. That's it. Like I say, this is all pre-set up within the Supabase Mailer project. It's really good. I thoroughly recommend you use it if you are thinking about sending emails. It's so much easier than building it yourself, obviously. And hopefully that has explained it in a manner that you can relate to and you can then take away and use in your own projects. So if you got this far, well done. Thank you very much for watching, and I will speak to you next time.